I think people are trying to rewrite the social contract. I was stunned. So March 13th, I got off of an airplane in New Haven, Connecticut. I had come from Austin, Texas. I had $409 in my pocket. The 16th, the economy, I stayed home. I stayed home for about 18 months, had that same $409 in my pocket throughout that whole period, or almost all of that period. I think I gave some to my wife to give a tip to somebody that delivered things to our home. So many of us stayed home. We were told it was too safe to go out. Then George Floyd got in a struggle with police and died and was killed. And the world erupted. And we were told that while we had to stay home and isolate because it was too dangerous to be involved, somehow it wasn't too dangerous for people to take to the streets and engage in mostly peaceful protests in which frequently buildings were burned and businesses destroyed. And then the New York Times began to put its foot on the gas, and in the name of the 1619 Project, began to talk about a so-called racial reckoning going on in the country. I listened to the BBC the other day, a soccer game of all things, and I heard the announcer, as the United States engages in its racial reckoning. And I just turned the radio off. There's no racial reckoning necessary in this country. Slavery was ended by the 13th Amendment shortly after the Civil War. Yes, Jim Crow was oppressive. We had comprehensive federal civil rights legislation imposed before many of your listeners were even born. And we continue to struggle with the impact of race in the United States. But don't let yourself be fooled for an instant. George Floyd was not killed because he was Black. George Floyd was a knucklehead. The police were called to the scene because he passed a counterfeit bill, allegedly. Officers wanted to speak to him. He wouldn't have any of it. They tried to get him to comply. He wouldn't do it. He was complaining that he couldn't breathe when he was sitting upright in the back of the police cruiser. He struggled when he got out of the police cruiser. Officers used the techniques they were trained to use to take him to the ground, and arguably, Chauvin remained on his back, not his neck, on his back too long, and he died. That's not systemic racism. That's a tragic outcome of a guy who didn't have the good sense to say, yes, sir, officer, what can I do for you? I'm innocent, but I'll take my dispute to a courtroom. So the social contract is being restruck, I think, as demographics change. And I think there is a growing recognition on the part of historically disfavored groups that they can seize power. You see this critical race theory being taught in schools, and somehow, we're taught that if you're white, you're not quite right, and that you owe people of color or the disadvantaged something. Newsflash to that percentage of the country that believes that. I don't know a goddamn thing. On account of accidents of birth. We owe one another equal respect and regard. And the moment you claim special regard for me on account of your status, you earn my scorn, and that dissolves the republic. So, I think there is an effort to restrike the balance. And I'm not sure where it's going to go without an underlying philosophic foundation rooted in something like Locke or rooted in some alternative philosophy. But I don't see one emerging. What I see is the politics of pathos. The worship of every person who can claim the mantle of victimhood. And as our politics become more and more extreme, the claims of victimhood become more and more ridiculous. In the end, all of us are required to pick up our bed and walk. And the sooner we get back to business and get back to work and restore the economy to vitality, the better off we all will be.